Welcome to the Drummer's Revolt. These words come from a field report dated October 1800. The ink runs where the paper folded. The signature is gone. The last readable line says the sound carried farther than the soldiers had prepared for. The page's brittle edges darkened with age corners missing. In the same box, archivists found a stretched piece of animal hide labeled drum skin. No date, no name, only a note, recovered from the property of a man called Gabriel. Its surface is charred at the corners, the stitching frayed. No indication of use beyond what is implied by the note. A letter from a plantation overseer dated August 29, 1800 reads, "Sir, I have burned one drum and confiscated the others." No reply survives. The original envelope is missing. A second hand in lighter ink annotates the margin, possibly still used in secret. WPA interviews from 1937 include a woman named Mary Curtis of Richmond. When asked about old songs, she said, "My granddaddy told me the drum talk. He say they send word without paper." The interviewer notes, informant refuses to elaborate further. A newspaper from September 10, 1800 reports Negroes apprehended for conspiring. Among their possessions, drums and horns. No additional context is given. The article ends mid-column, cut off by a crease across the page. A militia captain's diary describes night exercise postponed, drum sounds upriver, no wind to carry it. The following page is missing. The archivist's marginal note, ink fade, words lost. An 1870 church ledger lists a burial under the name The Drummer. No kin, no cause of death. Faint graphite beneath the entry reads, "Noise heard again at service." The pastor's annotation simply says, "Superstition." Another fragment from a WPA transcription reads, "They beat the time so folk hear it, but no one say who start." The paper is torn. Only partial sentences survive. No author is recorded. The militia list preserved from October 1800 names 19 participants. In the oral history passed down by families, a woman insists there were 20. That discrepancy is noted in pencil in the margin by an archivist in 1938, possible loss or omission. An affidavit from Richmond, 1871, records a former soldier. "While stationed near the old mill site, I heard what I took for distant gunfire, but it was a steady rhythm, unbroken like a march. We investigated, found no one." The clerk annotates nonsense or mishearing. Fieldworker E.W., 1937, reports informant claims beat heard before rain. The typed page ends mid-word. A handwritten note says overdue. Her further correspondence never arrives. The folder is left open in the archive. Court documents indicate confession obtained under questioning. Prisoner admits use of drum to summon conspirators. The clerk's signature line is blank. Oral records insist he never beat for war, only for memory. Execution records Dawn carried out. Oral tradition. The rope kept time. The word returned appears on a marginal slip of paper attached to the original sheet. An old ledger in the Richmond County collection notes, "All instruments destroyed. Folklore reports, hands still tap the walls when the wind changes. No corroboration exists." Children's rhymes in 1930s Richmond recall black drums rolling down the hill. Observers note the rhythm matches the cadence described in early militia notes. A letter from Governor Monroe's clerk reads, "The rebellion was extinguished in full. Oral memory. But the sound moved on through the fields beyond the soldiers' eyes." In a WPA interview, a woman whispers, "The drums never stopped. They hid. They wait." The transcript indicates a pause of 5 seconds. The next line is illegible. Artifacts survive only partially. One drum fragment charred and bent. The accession record labels it 75 JM12 missing in 1975 renovations. Oral accounts recall its beat. The surviving records of the Drummer's Revolt are scattered across multiple archives in Virginia. The largest collection resides at the Library of Virginia in Richmond under the category Unverified Local Events 1800 to 1802. The pages are fragile, ink has faded, and many corners are missing, leaving gaps in the text. Several sheets have been folded multiple times, producing creases that obscure marginal notes, while some lines are partially illegible due to age and handling. Another significant portion of material originates from the Works Progress Administration Federal Writers Project in Richmond during 1936 to 1938. Fieldworker E.W. collected oral testimonies from formerly enslaved individuals and their descendants. Her notes are often incomplete, with torn pages, faded ink, and pencil annotations that sometimes obscure the original content. Some of her pages end abruptly mid-sentence, suggesting that part of the testimony was lost or left unfinished. Several fragments reference rhythmic sounds reported on plantations near Brook Hill before and during what is now referred to as the Revolt. No document provides a complete narrative. Marginal notes suggest that the rhythm was meaningful, though the purpose or interpretation of it remains unknown. The motif of rhythm persists through multiple sources, suggesting significance beyond simple noise or musical practice. The earliest field report, written by Lieutenant Samuel Bryce, notes an unauthorized assembly of colored persons using drums for signaling. The page ends midline and ink blots cover some names and locations. The following sheet is missing. This report contains no explicit instructions for suppression, leaving historians to infer the official response from later documents and marginal annotations. A letter from a plantation overseer dated August 29, 1800 describes confiscation and destruction of drums. It reads, "I have burned one drum and confiscated the others." No reply survives. The margin contains a note, possibly retained elsewhere, suggesting that some instruments may have remained in circulation despite the order. Maps produced by the Freedmen's Bureau during Reconstruction show population movements away from Henrico County. One arrow points back toward Brook Hill, labeled "Families Remain Behind, Refuse to Relocate." No explanation is provided for why some families stayed. The red ink used to draw the line suggests emphasis, though the reasoning remains unclear, leaving only a trace of intent. A church ledger from 1870 lists a burial under the name "The Drummer." There is no kin or cause of death noted. Beneath the entry, faint graphite reads, "Noise heard again at service." Clerical annotation simply dismisses it as superstition, yet the note persists in the ledger, echoing the motif of rhythm and recurring sound. Several newspaper clippings from 1800 describe arrests of individuals found in possession of drums. The notices list names and confiscated items but provide no context or explanation of the circumstances. The following issues contain no updates, leaving gaps in the public record and contributing to the ambiguity of the historical narrative. EW's 1937 field notes indicate that multiple informants refused to discuss drums. One page ends mid-sentence, "They say the drum." The subsequent lines are lost to moisture damage. Fieldworker EW was last seen traveling east toward Varina, and her further correspondence never arrived. The folder containing her notes is left open in the archive, reinforcing the motif of incomplete testimony. The militia inventory for October 1800 lists 27 instruments confiscated from the plantation. One drum fragment, accession number 75 JM12, held by the Jamestown Museum, was last documented in 1975 and later reported missing. Its absence leaves a physical gap in the evidence, while oral traditions maintain the drum's presence in memory. A 1938 audio field recording contains the line, "We hear it once more after rain." The tape is damaged, playing with intermittent clicks with no continuation. This incomplete testimony exemplifies the tension between written records and oral memory. The sound described persists even when the documentation fails to capture it. Freedmen's Bureau letters from 1867 describe nightly gatherings near ruins of an old mill. Patrol reports confirm no participants were found. A note concludes, "Cause unknown, sound persists." The reports acknowledge the phenomenon without offering explanation or resolution, leaving only a trace of uncertainty. Scholars note inconsistencies between written and oral records. Names differ, dates vary, and some events appear multiple times under different identifiers. Despite these variations, the recurring motif of rhythm and drumming persists across all accounts, suggesting a continuous cultural or historical phenomenon that transcends individual testimony. The disappearance of fieldworker EW remains unresolved. Records show her last location as a road leading toward Brook Hill, the same route cited in 1800 militia correspondence. Her absence contributes to the mystery, as there is no official account explaining her disappearance or the missing pages from her field notes. Subsequent generations attempted to reconcile incomplete records with oral testimony. Copies of original documents were made, but each replication introduced minor discrepancies, leaving only fragments connected by recurring references to sound drums and gatherings. The archival chain remains unbroken but incomplete. The collection also includes marginal notes from the 1930s, indicating the continued persistence of rhythmic motifs. Archivists recorded them in pencil, often as single words or short phrases, noting recurring pattern meaning unknown. These brief annotations preserve the echo of oral tradition within the formal archive. Maps, letters, court documents, and inventories collectively offer only partial insight into the events surrounding Brook Hill. The scattered nature of the evidence reflects both the suppression of the uprising and the passage of time. It demonstrates the interplay between recorded fact and remembered practice, with rhythm acting as a connector across generations. The record suggests intentional concealment and gaps in documentation. Some pages are missing, others damaged, and portions of testimony remain incomplete. These absences leave space for interpretation while reinforcing the persistent echo motif. The rhythm endures through what survives, bridging the gap between recorded events and cultural memory. The documents and oral accounts together establish a framework for the revolt without offering full clarity. Each fragment, field report, diary, ledger entry, or oral interview adds to a mosaic of partial evidence. The material suggests action, response, and ritual, but the full story remains impossible to reconstruct with certainty. The field worker who recorded the oral testimony vanished 2 years later along the same road described in the 1800 militia report. No evidence explains her disappearance. The folders she left behind remain in the archive, open with faded ink and torn edges. The motif of rhythm continues in the silence she left behind. In 1801, an inventory from Henrico County lists one small drum burned. A later catalog entry from 1842 adds none recovered. The handwriting differs, suggesting the note was added decades after the event. The original paper carries scorch marks as though fire reached its edges. Despite official claims that all instruments were destroyed, the oral record insists otherwise. They took the skin but not the sound. But a letter from Governor Monroe's clerk reports the rebellion was extinguished in full. The following page is torn. Only the lower margin remains, bearing the half-finished sentence, however certain noises. The ink fades at the break. In oral tradition, the missing words are filled by memory. They silenced men, but not the wind. A church ledger from 1870 lists a burial under the name The Drummer. The entry is surrounded by faint notes and pencil noise heard again at service. A later hand writes, superstition, yet every retelling insists the same. The rhythm returned during the hymn, rising beneath the preacher's voice like distant thunder. A plantation overseer's diary describes nights still yet rhythm beneath the ground. The next page is blank, perhaps torn away. Decades later, freed families living near Brook Hill tell their children that ground talks when it rains. They would not sleep with windows open, afraid the sound might enter and remember their names. An 1802 court transcript lists 20 defendants. 2 lines for names are left empty. The clerk's marginal note reads, page too damaged to copy. In WPA oral histories, a woman recalls, my grandma said there was 20, not 19. The last one walked out the rain. The missing name becomes its own rhythm, absent, yet still counted. In a Freedmen's Bureau letter from 1867, an agent reports gatherings near the ruins of an old mill. The patrol found no one. Noise persisted. Possible water flow, the report concludes. Local oral history disagrees. It was the calling. They beat the air, not the skin. The phrase recurs across testimonies collected a century later. An anonymous fieldworker note preserved from 1937 says informant claims beat heard before rain. The carbon copy ends mid-word. Ribbon fades. In the next box, her supervisor writes EW overdue. The word overdue becomes a legend itself. Old women in the region whisper, she followed the sound too far. The Richmond Enquirer, March 1801, reports all disturbances suppressed. The populace restored to calm. The issue following contains no mention of Brook Hill. Yet a surviving WPA interview records that night the quiet hurt your ears. Even the dogs didn't bark. Silence enters the record as a measurable event. Missionary letters from 1820 warn against pagan rhythms and field chants. The author calls them unfit for Christian ears. A century later, a woman interviewed by Alan Lomax's team explains, they say we can't beat no drum, but the Lord let us keep our feet. The sound persists not through defiance, but through adaptation. An 1874 Reconstruction petition describes a man named Jacob Miles, a soldier in the U.S. colored troops, testifying, we heard marching at night when no one was walking. The examiner writes, imagination. But oral memory completes the missing line. Maybe they still walking, just slower now. An 1801 plantation inventory mentions the confiscation of wooden vessels used for storage. The entry is routine. Yet nearby the same handwriting adds others used as instruments. In local tradition, barrels became drums after the originals were destroyed. They took the hollow, not the sound, one informant explained. A note from the Richmond County Archive. 1848, rumors persist of communication by rhythm. The handwriting is shaky as though written in haste. The phrase, "no evidence," is underlined twice. The more the record denies, the louder the echo becomes in oral tradition. An 1889 church record from the same area mentions a humming under the choir floorboards. The pastor marks it acoustic resonance. In oral retellings, this becomes the ground remembering the song. Over time, physics and folklore blend into one shared vocabulary. In 1938, a WPA transcription records a verse sung by an elderly woman named Sarah Bragg. They burned the drum, but not the beat. The recorder notes a hesitation, 4 seconds of silence before she continues humming. The transcription includes the annotation, "Pause resembles cadence." An overseer's diary found in 1801 states, "Men posted near Brook Hill swear to have heard nothing." 2 lines later, "Cannot sleep for the noise." The contradiction stands uncorrected. Historians consider it fatigue. Folklore calls it fear. A letter from a freed man in 1868 reads, "The night they hanged him, the rope moved like it had music." The official record confirms the execution but omits such detail. The oral memory preserves it as proof that rhythm cannot die, it only changes its instrument. A field worker's 1937 memo reads, "Informants unwilling to speak after sunset." She adds, "They said the drum don't like being mentioned after dark." Her file ends there. In oral retelling, the phrase becomes a warning, "Don't name what still beats." Between the written page and the spoken word lies a gap neither record can bridge. The archive insists on silence. The people remember sound. Both claim truth. Both hold fragments of the same event. When placed side by side, the distance between fact and folklore narrows until they begin to echo one another, each reflecting the rhythm of what was never meant to be forgotten. All participants were accounted for and executed without delay. Oral record. They say no one was left alive, but the sound kept walking. The county ledger lists 19 names. The WPA transcript preserves only 17. 2 blank lines remain where names should be. In the margin, an archivist notes page too damaged to copy. In oral versions, 1 extra name returns every time the story is told. A 1801 letter declares, "No survivors found." A 1938 recording answers, "But the drums still answered that night." The next line on the original page is missing. Only 1 word remains returned. The archivist underlined it twice as if recognizing a pattern repeating across centuries. An inventory from Henrico County lists 1 drum burned. A child's song collected in the 1930s carries the line, "They took the skin but not the sound." The inventory describes ash. The song describes memory. Both use the same rhythm, 5 beats a pause, and 1 return. Governor Monroe's clerk reports rebellion extinguished in full. The last page of his letter contains half a sentence. However, certain noises. The phrase ends abruptly. Scholars attribute it to damage, but ink bleed. Analysis suggests hesitation. Oral memory fills the space with a single line, however certain names still answer. A church record from 1870 mentions noise heard again during service. The pastor's correction reads, "Unfounded rumor." The same line appears in later editions, rewritten, harmony restored. In oral tradition, the story shifts the hymn found company. A field worker's notebook from 1937 informant claims beat heard before rain. The carbon copy ends mid-word. The supervisor writes EW overdue. 2 months later, the same file contains a single new sheet with 1 phrase typed in uppercase, noise recorded, source unknown, no signature. A report from 1802 concludes drumming prohibited by order. A WPA informant 135 years later says they use their feet instead. When the sound is banned, the body learns to remember. The report calls it silence. The memory calls it survival. An overseer's diary. Men posted near Brook Hill swear to have heard nothing. 2 lines later, cannot sleep for the noise. The contradiction remains unedited. Historians call it fatigue. Oral accounts call it listening. A Freedmen's Bureau memorandum in 1867 reads, "Untraceable vibrations cause unknown." The report ends with "filed no follow-up." In the same folder, another hand has scribbled "pattern too regular for natural cause." The phrase "too regular" appears in later copies crossed out each time. A teacher's 1841 journal describes children beating sticks at recess rhythm uncanny. She underlines the word uncanny twice. 40 years later, a missionary letter condemns pagan hand motions mimicking forbidden instruments. The line between memory and discipline narrows until rhythm itself becomes an act of resistance. A soldier's note from the U.S. Colored Troops, 1864. Wind blows strange here, always on time with the drums. The military report lists no weather disturbances. In local retelling, the wind becomes a participant keeping time when men could not. The 1880s local paper prints rumors of continued unrest unfounded. A week later, livestock reports mention animals startled during rain. A modern historian correlates rainfall patterns and seismic data low frequencies match the tempo of marching feet. The official denial becomes the rhythm's proof. An 1802 plantation log states, "Evidence seized, burned." A 20th century archivist adds a note, "Ash residue persists." The physical remnants mirror the oral refrain, "Ash don't keep silence long." The record fights to stay closed. The echo keeps reopening it. A WPA interview records an informant whispering. They said the sound moved to the trees. The transcriber pauses mid-line, inserting ellipsis. Her next sentence is missing. The following page starts abruptly with "rain came next." Scholars call it equipment failure. Folklore calls it warning. A field tape from 1938 contains static that repeats at exact intervals 5 seconds apart. Audio technicians identify the interference as environmental. The waveform aligns with the pace of a heartbeat. The file is stored under unexplained noise, Brook Hill. A reconstruction agent writes, "Order maintained. No further incidents." His pen pressure weakens mid-word. The next sentence begins, "Though I do not trust the stillness." It is the only personal remark in the file. Silence here is not absence, but tension held between ink and thought. A 1979 geological survey registers low-frequency vibrations beneath Brook Hill consistent with drums or machinery. The researcher notes no instruments present in vicinity. Locals call it the ground remembering. Science calls it coincidence. Both agree on one thing: the sound continues. Each record attempts closure. Each retelling reopens it. Between no survivors and the drums still answered, the line blurs. The archive insists on evidence. The community insists on echo. Neither side lies. Both repeat. In 1866, a map from the Freedmen's Bureau shows migration routes of newly freed families leaving plantations around Henrico County. The lines radiate outward like spokes, yet one faint arrow turns back inward toward Brook Hill, labeled "Family Stayed Behind, Refused to Move." The handwriting differs from the main text. The archivist later remarked, "Possibly symbolic, not literal." Still, oral history insists the ones who stayed were listening for something. A hymn collected in 1870 carries the line, "March wind, tell me where my brother gone." Its meter does not fit Western hymn structures. When sung aloud, it forms an uneven 7-beat pattern similar to African field rhythms. The collector underlined this anomaly, but provided no explanation. In local memory, that song was not just lament, it was a way to answer the sound from the earth. A soldier's letter from 1864 reads, "Camp near the road they call Gabriel's Path. Wind blows strange here, always on time, with drums." The report of his unit mentions no such phenomenon. In his widow's pension file, the same sentence reappears in her handwriting as if copied by memory. It is the only line preserved from his correspondence. A newspaper from 1895, the Richmond Planet, reports residents near Brook Hill hearing low rumblings before rain. The journalist attributes it to underground water. The sketch beside the article labels the site The Hollow. The caption beneath reads, "Said to be where the first revolt began. No follow-up story was ever printed." Local folklore calls the hollow the mouth of the ground. Elders tell children to place their palms on the dirt before storms. If it beats once, you safe. If it beats twice, you pray. In later interviews, residents still recall the practice not as superstition but as respect, listening for what history forgot to write. A Reconstruction era, affidavit in Richmond, 1871, records a former soldier, Jacob Miles, testifying. "While stationed near the old mill, I heard rhythm like march steady but distant. We found no one. The officer dismissed it as echo from the river." Miles added, "No river that night, only wind. The line sits alone, final and unchallenged." An 1874 petition describes livestock panic following rainfall. The clerk writes, "Claim denied natural thunder." The farmer's own handwriting adds, "Ain't thunder, it's calling." The phrase survives as oral refrain in later generations. When thunder too steady, that's them keeping time. A Freedmen's Bureau report from 1868 documents students clapping unusual rhythmic patterns while reciting alphabet. The teacher writes, "The rhythm distracts from learning but seems deeply ingrained." The supervisor's note, "Recommend discouragement of African beats." Yet descendants later said, "That's how we learned letters, same way our people called names." Missionary letters from 1822 describe circles drawn in dirt with humming foot tapping and hand motions resembling prayer. The observer writes uncertain whether worship or communication. In black churches of the 20th century, the same circle appears in the prayer ring, the slow shuffle, the closed eyes, the quiet hum. Scholars now recognize it as continuity, not coincidence. In 1912, a church bulletin warns against pagan field chants tempting youth to trance. The sermon title reads, "Silence is Salvation." 3 decades later, a woman named Sarah Bragg tells a folklorist, "They stop the drum, but they can't stop the shout." The tape ends with faint tapping, 3 beats pause, then 1. A 1938 field recording captures a verse sung by an elderly man. "They burned the drum, but the ground still sings." The microphone clicks, recording static like breathing between phrases. The archivist adds a note, ambient vibration not explainable by machine error. An Army chaplain at Camp Lee in 1918 observes black troops keeping cadence in sleep, fingers tapping cots in unison. He reports it as a nervous habit. The same behavior appears in a 1943 study on rhythm memory among veterans. Both note identical tempo, 88 beats per minute. A 1979 geological survey detects low-frequency tremors beneath Brook Hill before rainfall. The report labels them environmental vibrations. In an interview the same year, an elderly resident says, "That's them still beating. You can't test for spirit with a machine." The sentences align almost perfectly in cadence. A letter from folklorist Zora Neale Hurston in 1941 describes an unrecorded Virginia legend of a vanished drummer whose beat marks seasonal change. The letter ends. Something underneath this, some truth in disguise. Hurston never published the story. Yet in Brook Hill, people still say the first storm of summer belongs to him. A World War II veteran interviewed in 1950 recalls hearing a drum beat during shell fire in Korea. "It was the same rhythm my mother clapped in church." The researcher calls it auditory illusion. His mother's response, recorded later, "That wasn't illusion. That was blood calling blood." A 2005 restoration of Richmond archives uncovered burned scraps of 19th century paper. One word was legible: beat. The fragments were misfiled under property seizure. That same year, community elders held a vigil at Brook Hill. They brought no instruments. They stood in a circle and clapped once. The ground echoed twice. Science measures frequency, amplitude, decay. History records ownership loss and silence. But the songs that survive measure something else entirely: distance between what was heard and what was believed. Between the instrument and the witness, between thunder and remembrance, the rhythm repeats, reshaping fact into faith. Each document seeks to define. Each story seeks to feel. When placed together, they form reflection paper and pulse report and song silence and return. The more one tries to separate them, the more they mirror each other until both reveal the same truth. The sound was never about rebellion. It was about remembering. No one wrote again. The final sheet in the record ends mid-sentence, ink fading into the paper as if retreating from view. The archivist's notation reads, "End uncertain." The last phrase remains. The sound carried farther than the soldiers had prepared for. Beneath it, faint indentation marks where the pen pressed without ink, unwritten but present. The silence after the final word feels deliberate, like a closing gesture meant to echo the rhythm itself. When microfilm was scanned, technicians noticed a faint clicking between frames. They logged it as real interference. Yet each click fell exactly 4 seconds apart. The machine captured not only the page, but a cadence. A century later, a volunteer cataloger typed "drum reference recurring. Connection unclear." Her handwriting near the edge tightens and stops, mid-word resin. The following page is missing. When the binder closes, its covers produce a low thump like a muted drum responding from within. Every artifact repeats its own rhythm. Dust on the shelves settles evenly. The lamp flickers once, then again in measured intervals. The archivist's heartbeat sinks to it unconsciously. Sound no longer lives in the air, it hides inside stillness, a rhythm that exists only when nothing else moves. The motif of return expands beyond the document. The first report heard drums before a storm, the last known recording captured static before rain. Different centuries, same pattern: sound before silence, silence before sound. The pattern doesn't age, it waits. One technician restoring the 1938 tape noticed a strange vibration in the background, matching 88 beats per minute, the same tempo noted in seismograph readings from 1979. The consistency across generations suggests either coincidence or something deeper, something breathing beneath interpretation. An elderly informant once said, "Sound don't need paper." When asked to clarify, she smiled and tapped her hand twice on the table. The microphone caught both strikes and the faint echo afterward. The transcript notes, unintended noise. The listener hears rhythm, the file records accident. The fieldworker known as EW vanished after reporting beat heard before rain. Her last typed note ends, "If I don't return, it means the sound found me." The page is filed under incomplete submission. Decades later, her words are still quoted during preservation training, not as evidence but as atmosphere. When another researcher retraced her route in 1978, the recorder on her shoulder began to hum whenever she stood near the field. The hum matched a heartbeat. She logged it as mechanical feedback. Yet her last journal entry reads, "It feels alive." The file ends there. At this point, silence becomes climax. The absence of information is not failure. It is the sound completing itself. Every word missing, every report cut short forms part of the same rhythm. When listened to together, the gaps align like measures of a single unfinished composition. Historians describe this phase as archival fatigue, the moment when the record refuses to yield meaning. But the rhythm does not require meaning. It requires presence. The listener's breath, the reader's pause, the heartbeat between sentences all become instruments. The archives contain no conclusive proof of revolt, yet the materials themselves pulse like living witnesses. Paper rustles when turned. Boxes close with dull thuds. The building's pipes moan before rain. Every element repeats the motif the drums keep answering. A curator once left a recorder running overnight inside the reading room. In the morning, the playback contained low vibrations, evenly spaced, faint as footsteps underwater. Maintenance blamed pressure changes. The curator kept a copy unlogged. She called it evidence of listening. No one claims authorship of the rhythm anymore. It is not owned, not remembered in full. It exists where words stop the space between notation and faith. The archive guards silence. The echo defies it. Both keep time. The final folder in the collection is marked "Returned." Inside is a blank page. No watermark, no ink. Yet under black light, tiny indentations appear. 4 marks, pause, 4 again. When tapped out, the rhythm matches the opening report's transcription timing. The circle closes. In the last verified interview, a descendant of the Curtis family said, "It's not the drums that keep calling. It's us forgetting to answer." The archivist who transcribed it included the note. Speaker paused for 17 seconds. Those 17 seconds became the truest record of all. The rhythm slows now. The page is almost finished. The silence waits its turn. Every report has ended here with nothing left to write and everything left to hear. No one wrote again. But the drums kept answering. The records now rest in temperature-controlled rooms, numbered and sealed. Box 12C holds the burned paper from 1800, its corners curled inward like hands folded in restraint. The catalog description reads, "Unclassified disturbance materials. Visitors seldom request it. When they do, the attendant reminds them, handle gently. It hums when moved." The fieldworker's original typewriter sits in storage ribbon, long faded keys rusted together. The last letter pressed was R. The archivist cataloged it as random. The key stuck mid-stroke as if trying to return. Some who've seen it claim to hear a faint metallic tap when the drawer shuts. Researchers still attempt to reconcile the contradictions. One side argues fabrication, another argues forgotten insurrection. Yet all agree the rhythm's persistence in oral memory defies explanation. The documents can be indexed, the echo cannot. It lives outside classification. In 1998, a sound technician testing humidity sensors in the archive captured a repeating pulse beneath the static 5 seconds apart, followed by 2 shorter intervals. The data was deleted from the final report, but the log remains in pencil, unidentified pattern drum-like. The handwriting fades halfway through the line. Community historians continue to visit Brook Hill. They bring microphones, sensors, hymnals. Each project ends the same way, with more silence than data. One graduate student wrote, "The ground refuses capture." Her advisor marked the sentence incorrect. Yet the phrase remains truer than any graph. Children from nearby neighborhoods still play in the fields, beating sticks on the ground, shouting, laughing, making music without knowing its origin. The rhythm repeats naturally, uncoached, familiar as heartbeat. Adults watch from porches, half smiling, half listening, uncertain whether what they hear belongs to the present or the past. At local church gatherings, elders hum a hymn called "Keep the Beat Low." It's not printed in hymnals, never written down. It moves in waves, long, short pause, return. The congregation sways unconsciously. Even microphones cannot capture it clearly. The sound folds back into itself before hitting the tape. When researchers replay the damaged WPA recordings, faint thumps emerge between sentences steady and low. Some say it's microphone contact noise. Others claim it's residue of the same rhythm embedded into the magnetic field. Either way, every attempt to remove it makes the voices sound incomplete. An archivist once described her experience cataloging Box 9D. It feels like listening to something that doesn't want to end. She requested reassignment. In her final note, she wrote, "History breathes slowly, but it breathes." Her words are kept with the file part of the permanent record. In 2020, a local history project transcribed every known document related to the revolt. After weeks of typing, the lead editor noticed an accidental rhythm in the keystrokes, 3 fast, 2 slow, 1 pause. She didn't plan it. When the recording of her typing was played back, it matched the pattern of the old field tapes. The site of the old plantation has been redeveloped, but residents still report hearing soft pounding before rain. The construction company recorded vibrations and concluded it was soil settling. Yet when the night is still, the sound aligns with breath, not earth. In churchyards, some graves marked unknown receive coins and sticks instead of flowers. Children knock the sticks twice against the stones before leaving. They don't know why they do it. The elders don't correct them. The act has replaced the name. Modern scholars call it cultural residue, a pattern of sound surviving after memory fades. But oral historians prefer another word, echo. An echo requires both voice and surface. Without one, it dies. The drums kept answering because something kept listening. Every new attempt to define the revolt redraws its borders. Was it uprising ceremony or memory disguised as protest? The official archive cannot decide. The folklore doesn't care. Both preserve the same truth, that silence can be a kind of survival. The WPA archive lists the field worker's final page as recovered fragment incomplete. The fragment reads only, "The sound is not the past. It is what keeps the past alive." The sentence ends there. No period. Only white space where continuation should be. During the bicentennial exhibition, a visitor leaned close to the display case containing the burned drum skin. He said quietly, "It's still warm." The attendant smiled and said, "It always is after rain." No one laughed. The moment passed like a heartbeat, then silence. Outside, thunder rolled over Richmond. Somewhere between the clouds and the soil, the air carried a pattern older than rebellion, older than language. The same rhythm that once called to freedom now calls to memory, marking time not by seconds but by absence.